fellow peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to my channel or to this podcast. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. Now, today's episode, guys, we're going to be talking about accounts of manipulation, coercive control, branding, medical complicity, financial crimes, and survivor trauma. So please listen with care and take breaks. Pause it if you need to. 100% understand, guys. It's a lot, and especially these episodes. Okay, so we have today, we have a Merry Christmas stuff, okay, and we have a Snoopy ugly sweater on, and then obviously we've got Snoopy outfits. So in part one of our mini-series, we followed Keith Raniere's vanguard from lonely childhood to polished self-help empire, whose inner circle operated on secrecy and obedience. In part two, we stayed close to the mother-daughter of Nancy and Lauren Salzman, learning how legitimacy and daily enforcement made NXIVM feel orderly and inescapable. Today in part three, I'm going to widen the lens even a little bit more. I'm going to follow the money on the Bronfman sisters, step inside the medicalized theatre of branding with Dr. Danielle Roberts, look squarely at Alison Mack's role at the first line DOS master, and trace the journey of India Oxenberg and how she entered, why she stayed, how she left. Along the way, we're going to see how investigative journalism and federal law enforcement turned whispers into warrants, and we'll take the time to sit with recovery and what it can look like from the other side. Now, this is a story of resource, money, medicine, and celebrity, and of how those resources were enlisted to build, launder, and shield a system that promised empowerment but delivered control. Now, first off, we're going to be talking about the Bronfmans. So long before NXIVM, the name Bronfman meant reach. The family's fortune is built atop the Seagram's empire, and it placed Claire and Sarah in a world of private jets, philanthropy, and influence. There's a mythology that money inoculate against manipulation. NXIVM really quickly undid that myth completely. When Claire encountered ESP, Executive Success Programs, the classes, the sashes, the vocabulary of the rational inquiry, she saw discipline masquerading as freedom and freedom masquerading as discipline. She admired the promise that she could subtract fear from your life if you added the work. She liked the way progress was measured, levels were achieved, time invested, commitments honored. The rhythm of it all made sense to someone who'd been raised to believe that discipline earns success. Now, I might add, guys, she was actually, I don't want to say she was, how do I say this? She was really quite jealous of her sister. And there were times where I think that clouded her judgment, essentially. So it was always really hard for her to really see, I guess, a picture where she was important as well. So Claire always sort of felt like she had been, I don't know, not blindsided by her sister, but always in her shadow. So I think when she did this and when she did ESP and NXIVM, it gave her a chance to step out of her sister's shadow. I hope that makes sense to people. And if you've watched like some of the documentaries, you'll sort of understand what I mean there. But on the outset, the relationship looked like patronage. Wealthy recruit underwrites a promising curriculum. But NXIVM's needs were not aspirational. They were really, really tactical. So with Claire's money, NXIVM could rent larger venues, open up new centres, pay staff, have what Keith needed, right? So it could also hire lawyers who knew how to stretch a case over years, private investigators who could assemble dossiers on these people that they confirmed they perceived as their enemies or defectors, and consultants who could shape the narrative a little bit. Every dollar expanded capacity, but it also extended survivability. Systems of control are fragile when they depend on a belief alone, when they become resilient when they can purchase retaliation and silence. Now, I'm going to give an example, and I realize it's quite a different example, but the Jones. So he had money. He was able to do all of these things like build that whole new world away from everybody else. So when I say it does seem to be that cult leaders do find funding and they find people who have got money or people who are willing to give up their own life savings. So Keith really hit the jackpot with Claire and Sarah. And I think that that is one of the reasons he held on so tight and manipulated Claire so cleverly. There is on one of the documentaries or podcasts that I listen to where Claire gives an account to a magazine and it just backfires massively. This article comes out and it just tears NXIVM apart. And Claire was just so devastated because all she wanted to do was lift up Keith Raniere. And he used that to manipulate her even more. So it is really about control. So Claire was in a vulnerable state to be manipulated. Inside, the presence of the Bronfman conferred legitimacy, right? So people who might have rolled their eyes at the sashes took NXIVM a little bit more serious when they learned an heiress was in the room. Outside, though, money gave NXIVM the means to flatten critics. So former members described the cost of telling the truth in public as terrifying, not only because of their collateral, but because of the litigation that comes with it. Complaint after complaint, motion after motion, steady grinding at the edges of savings accounts and sleep. That was the shape of the fortress that Claire helped build. So lawsuits as a moat, surveillance as sentry, an aura of prestige as a drawbridge. So it's tempting to ask really why Claire became such a devoted person to NXIVM. People close to her have offered really simple explanations. Admiration of rigor, hunger for community, belief in the rhetoric of ethics. Those are probably true, and they remind us that vulnerability is situational. You don't have to be naive to be you don't have to be naive to be recruited. You only have to be in a moment where what was offered sounds like an answer to a problem you already have. So NXIVM spoke fluently about aspiration. Claire heard it and translated it into payrolls, retainers, and flight itineraries. Now, you can see, though, over the years, the sisters' connection became not just symbolic, but really structural. So NXIVM's legal posture really hardened with them coming on board. When journalists published, a letter arrived. When defectors spoke, a lawsuit would follow. So behind the letters and the suits were bank wires and retainers that kept adversaries on their heels constantly. So former members recall hiring their own attorneys, learning to answer interrogations, and feeling the chilling pleasure of a calendar populated with hearings. A human being, though, cannot live in court and also have a life. That was part of the point of NXIVM, to just grind them through it. Meanwhile, the surveillance culture, it's maturing over time. You've already heard about the box of banking records found during a search of Nancy's home. Private information about critics and adversaries. Money makes it easier to obtain such things, though, right? And easier to make them organized and much more actionable. So within the organization, the mere suggestion the NXIVM possessed financial leverage over its enemies had a really disciplining effect on people. People learned to weigh every text, every call, every post against the possibility of retaliation. This is how secrecy grows, not by making everyone quiet, by ensuring that people will think twice. This is just the epitome of disgusting behaviors, but as far as I'm concerned, by the way. And that legal components, right? Claire came with a guilty plea. So the overall sentencing and everything for Claire came with a guilty plea and a sentence of 81 months. Judges and prosecutors used language like unquestioning loyalty to describe her devotion, amplified harm. The numbers, months, fines, forfeitures tell one kind of story. Another is told in the silences that money purchased while NXIVM operated. On paper, Claire funded classes and infrastructure. In practice, she extended the life of a lie. Her sister Sarah walked a bit of a different road, though. She created businesses, stepped in and out of NXIVM's orbit, but eventually moved on without any charges. Now, the divergence between the sisters underscores something important. Two people can stand in the same room and hear two different promises. One hears discipline as a freedom, the other hears discipline as surveillance. One stays and pays, the other one drifts and doubts. NXIVM didn't conquer the Bronfmans, it convinced one of them deeply enough to change what resistance cost. Now, to really understand that influence fully, imagine the spreadsheet NXIVM used to manage risk. Columns for names, defectors, journalists, attorneys, parents, rows for actions, letters sent, complaints filed, investigators hired, trips funded, cells for dates and outcomes. Money allows you to build that spreadsheet and actually act on it. Money turns really hurt feelings into strategy, turns annoyance into campaign, and turns doubt into delay. If you are a survivor wondering whether to speak, that spreadsheet is part of what stands between you, your voice, and a microphone. So Claire funded so many lawsuits, and they basically bankrupted all of the defectors that spoke out against them. Barbara Boucher had a really rough time on all of this. When NXIVM collapses, though, survivors learned in discovery what had been purchased in their shadows. They saw copies of emails about them, lists with their names, summaries of their finances, notes about who they were close to, who might be turned. The shock was just that the document existed. It's the community that advertised itself as really ethical, spending money, learning how to punish its critics. The contradiction lives in the heart of NXIVM's Bronfman chatter, the conversion of wealth into injury, right? Like, it is at the end of the day, they used all of that money and all of that power to make sure that every single one of their critics was silenced. If you get a chance, Google the Frank report. I will try and I will make sure that I put it into my description. But I've got to tell you, he was relentless, and good on him. He just published article after article after article, and they would keep suing him, and he just kept going. So good on him. Good on him for doing it. Next, I'm actually going to be talking about Danielle Roberts. If money built a fortress, then Danielle Roberts built the ritual inside it. A licensed osteopathic physician, she joined NXIVM and rose through its ranks. By the time DOS was fully formed, she was the person who held the cauterizing pen, the instrument that would etch a design encoding Keith Raniere's initials. On paper, there was a doctor applying a mark. In reality, it was a ritual designed to convert pain into obedience and scar into a story. Survivors described the room where branding happened as simultaneously intimate and quite terrifying. The space was often in a private home, quite often Alison Mack, I might add. The hour was sometimes late, so sometimes like 2, 3 in the morning. The lighting shifted depending on who was present. There was women restraining other women. There was no anesthetic. The smell of burnt flesh became a soundtrack, abrupt, nauseating, and unforgettable. Before the pen touched the skin, women were directed to say that horrible line, "Master, please brand me." It would be an honor. It is hard to overstate how much this line did its psychological work. That sentence reframed violation as a request, pain as privilege, and submission as desire. I cannot tell you how disgusted I am that another woman would do this to another woman. The fact that in her brain that she could justify this, and I'm sorry if anyone has ever burnt their hair or burnt any type of their body, right? I've done it with a curling iron and also a straightening iron. I've done it. Everyone's done it, right? That smell is foul. So imagine that, where you've got 6 women in a room and you've got one woman holding another woman's arms and the other 2, I think, are holding their legs. Imagine that, and you are a physician. You cause no pain or do no harm, I think it is. Do no harm. And what on earth are you doing? Harm. Disgusting. Roberts, she's believing it's forming in interviews after NXIVM's collapse. She said as much, presenting herself as a guide, helping women access courage. In medicine, the first principle is do no harm. In DOS, harm was renamed as growth. That renaming mattered because it recruited professional authority to bless something that the body knows is wrong. A doctor's calm voice is very persuasive. An instrument in a doctor's hand is persuasive. Put them together, wrap them in an ethics vocabulary, and you can convince people to accept assault as a ceremony. I cannot get over what she did. The ritual's mechanics are straightforward: restrain, inscribe, reassure. The ritual's meaning grew more complicated over time. Early on, women didn't know the emblem had the initials. Later on, it sort of became apparent that some did. In other cases, the brand functioned almost as like a seal to where it was to announce belonging and to accept a story about what belonging requires: loyalty without question, availability without pause, and a willingness to prove devotion through pain. The branding's aftermath extended beyond the hour in that room, though. Scars, as everybody is aware who's had them, they itch, they pull. The marks were fairly visible and felt in mirrors and showers and intimacy. Many survivors have actually pursued plastic surgery to alter and remove those brands, a process itself that actually involves far more pain and more money and more decisions about your identity. Others have actually chosen to keep the mark as a private reminder, evidence of a past that they refuse to hide. Both choices for me are acts of agency. Both are part of how people take their bodies back. So as far as I'm concerned, you do you, boo. That's the way that I look at it. In the professional world, Danielle faced disciplinary action. Medical boards examined her conduct and revoked her license. Thank Christ. The sanction matters because it underscores a public consensus. The redefinition of harm as growth is not only immoral, but unethical in every strict sense. Her story is a cautionary tale about how credentials can cloak coercion. A license can become a costume, and it can turn the person wielding the pen into a symbol of authority, even as they turn their skin into a symbol of obedience. I am so grateful that she is never going to be a doctor again. She is one of the most appalling human beings up there. Okay, we've got another one. We've got another appalling human being about to come here. Alison Mack from Screen to Scandal. If Roberts was able to provide the medicalised theatre and the Bronfman was the money, Alison provided that celebrity status. Known for her role in Smallville, she carried with her the glow of an actress whose characters were smart, strong, and kind. NXIVM leveraged that growth and that particular glow that she had. Recruits describe meeting Alison made the program feel less fringe and more mainstream, a brand endorsed by someone who knew the world beyond just those seminar rooms. Let me be clear. She is not the only celebrity. There is a couple of Battlestar Galacticas. There's a particular actress from Hawaii Five-0. She was also on Battlestar Galactica. There was some big names. Alison Mack is one of the biggest ones because she was one of the first-line DOS masters. It's not only that. She was one of their biggest contributors, and she's all over saying how much work that they have done for her. So I'm not saying that there were not other celebrities. She's just probably the most known. And the other ones potentially got out before, the problem started. So Alison did not remain a face at a gala. She became a first-line DOS master, a woman who's tasked with recruiting and binding other women. Messages produced at her trial showed her instructing subordinates about collateral, make it damaging. Readiness drills, respond within seconds. And diets, discipline is part of growth. There is no need to speculate about her role. The documents all speak for itself. The documentaries, the podcasts, everything. They show a person who adopted NXIVM's vocabulary and weaponized it in support of a hierarchy nested inside a cult. Perhaps maybe one of the most chilling factors or details about her involvement in the script of the branding, the phrase, "Master, please brand me, it would be an honor," does not appear to have emerged spontaneously from a room of a terrified woman. It reads like a written to-do work on their mind. Those who heard Mack's voice carving the sentence into memory understood that celebrity can be as persuasive as a doctor's license. The public believes in fame. Inside NXIVM, that belief was recruited to make a human look like it was a breakthrough. I don't know. I think I think go and listen to the podcast. She was probably very susceptible to some grooming. I think Keith groomed her very well. I think she took on a life of its own. But I think there was definitely she's not all bad, if that makes sense. Now, the legal arc of Alison includes also a guilty plea to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, a 36-month sentence, and a release in July 2023. Spoken about it with regret and responsibility, I would yes and no. Public statements that some accept as sincere, others scrutinize for timing and its tone. It's possible to read her story as a cognitive capture, a person who believed she was helping women but grow by insisting they prove their loyalty, a person whose proximity to a charismatic leader dissolved boundaries she might have otherwise maintained, and a person who later confronted the record of what she had enforced. I would think for everybody, her arc complicates simple narratives about villains, right? She's an enforcer, and in some ways, she's a genuine believer. She amplified the harm and later cooperated with accountability, but it definitely doesn't absolve her mark in this world. It just gives you some context, guys. NXIVM worked in part because it convinced talented resource people to use their charisma and competence to scale coercion. She did that. The courtroom acknowledges it, right? So the sentence definitely reflects it. The post-release interviews wrestle with it. The question as ever, though, is what do we learn, what did we learn from it and prevent the next version of this story? I am not saying she's a victim. I'm not saying she's a villain. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying there are some parts of when I listen to her, I don't find her an empathetic person. I find myself challenging what she's actually saying out loud. I think it's very easy for me to do that, though, because I'm standing from a very different point of view. I haven't been a part of that lifestyle. I don't know. I sit very on the fence on this one. So amid the machinery and money and celebrity and ritual, India Oxenberg teaches us how incrementalism feels from the inside. She did not join NXIVM to be branded. She joined to belong, to grow, to commit to a version of herself that she wanted to admire. The first request was small: share a private thought, write down a few, promise to keep a secret, eat with discipline, respond quickly. The second request was small. The ninth request felt bigger. The 20th felt like a lifestyle. By then, the ledger of collateral that made silence feel safer than speech. Her mum, Catherine Oxenberg, she refused to stand back. Man, she's amazing. She turned love into pressure. She did interviews. She did meetings, calls, public pleas. She made NXIVM feel really uncomfortable. And as a result, her daughter was turned very much against her. She made her daughter's story, very visible. She did documentaries and cameras captured all of that, like all of it, her speeches, what she was trying to do. She didn't have an off switch when it came to this. And she did not allow them to go. She really pulled hard. Now, when she wanted to offer it, India was not interested, but she kept pushing. She is what every mother does. When India left DOS, she became the work of translation. She's trying to turn personal harm into public literacy. She wrote, she's filmed, she's spoken about it. She became the person she needed in the room when she was recruited. Someone who could explain how empowerment rhetoric can become obedience and how to re-inhabit ordinary choices as victories. Sleep without readiness, eat without worry, text without permission. Advocacy matters because survival's not about endurance, it's about meaning. And the point of telling this story is to not relive it, but it's to make it useful and make sure this type of stuff doesn't happen again. Now, India's account also underscores a truth survivors repeat: healing is granular. It lives in breakfast and at bedtime. It's calendars without drills in friendships that don't have any leverage. They don't have any collateral. Many former DOS members describe their exquisite relief of discovering that their phones can actually just be turned off. They talk about new rules in their homes, doors that lock, refrigerators that contain food. They are the ones that have chosen that food, mirrors that reflect bodies that they own, that they have. They describe the surprise of hunger feeling like information instead of failure, the pleasure of saying no without a fear of penalty, and the quiet power of telling a secret to a therapist rather than a master. Recovery is never going to erase that scar tissue or those records. It's going to build around them. For some, that includes surgery that alters and removes brands, procedures that carry risk and a lot of cost, and a lot of emotional weight. For others, it includes keeping those marks, and they want to take ownership of their body. They don't want that to have a history. So both forms are they are valid. They are empowering. It's all about one thing though. It's a choice. If secrecy is the oxygen for coercive system, journalism and law enforcement are the windows that let all the air in. Before the October 2017 expose, there were blogs, there were small outlets, there's whispers that something lived. Something was underneath all of that NXIVM shine. The New York Times article made those whispers a lot more legible. It described branding without anesthesia. It collateral leveraged as blackmail and a hierarchy with Keith at the apex. Legibility matters because the law cannot prosecute rumors. It needs facts. And journalism is often about how facts become public enough to demand an investigation. Now, I might say Bonnie and Sarah and Mark are the critical people behind this. They are the ones that, Sarah in particular, she spoke about it. She showed her marks. She showed what had happened to her. And I cannot commend that woman enough. Incredibly brave. So once the Eastern District of New York steps in, the work looked slow from the outside. They had to trace emails. They had to seize servers. They interviewed former members. They're looking at the financials. The arrest in March 2018 carried its own symbolism, though. The man who preached mastery hiding in a closet in Mexico while the authorities bombarded his girlfriend. And all of these indictments that follow, Alison Mack, Nancy and Lauren, Kathy, Claire, pleas are entering. Cooperation is being signed. Testimonies giving away. The trial in 2019, it's got all of that evidence and it's all into a verdict. I am not remotely upset that he is going to spend 120 years behind jail. I mean, he's not going to spend 120 years, but he's been given 120 years. I don't think he's learned anything though. I really don't. What remains most importantly after these verdicts are read and the cameras leave, there are lives that people have to live after this. Survivors speak of mornings that feel a little like rebellions. They describe bodies that relearn hunger and desire and to rest and to sleep. They tell stories of friendships found in support groups, rooms where words like readiness and ethical breach are dismantled and replaced with ordinary language about boundaries and trust. Some spend months, possibly years in therapy building a new distinction between discipline and deprivation, between accountability and surveillance. They talk about an incremental victory, a day without drills, a week without court, a month without contact. For those who enforce the system, Alison Mack, Lauren Salzman, re-entry, it's going to come back with a little bit of a paradox for people. They are understood as both perpetrators and objects of coercive control. Courts articulated the duality in sentences that braid consequence with a recognition of the grooming. The public is going to wrestle with it in interviews and op-eds. They're going to wrestle with it. I wrestle with it. So survivors navigate it by deciding how or whether to accept those apologies. The point is to not achieve consensus. It's to ensure that humility and accountability accompany everything. Now, these reflections, I'm going to close off this chapter first. Money magnifies. It magnifies good when it funds care. It magnifies harm when it funds secrecy. So the Bronfman chapter teaches us that wealth can be laundered into legitimacy and deployed a strategy. Second, credentials can cloak as coercion. Danielle Roberts shows how professional authority can be recruited to bless what the body knows is wrong. And thirdly, that charisma scales. Alison Mack's fame did not merely decorate NXIVM, it drew people near and taught them to trust. If you remember nothing else, remember this: autonomy is not negotiable. Any system that asks you to trade in for belonging is not a power to path, it's a detour for control. And I think if you guys get a chance, go and watch some of these documentaries on cults. It's absolutely insane. I could genuinely, once I have done all the serial killers that I want to do, I could do a podcast on cults. There's so many of them. And I'm not saying that any of those people that were involved do not deserve some type of forgiveness. Everybody does. Thank you for listening to part 3 of my NXIVM miniseries. Today we watched how money can build a fortress, how medicine can become ritual, and how celebrity scaled recruitment, and how survival becomes advocacy. If you found this episode as awesome as I did, please hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment, tell me your thoughts, ask me some questions. And if you like, share this show with someone who might want to watch it. Take care of yourselves, my fellow peanuts. Have a fabulous weekend. Bye.